All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Soccer Show. These Premier League fixtures are coming in thick and fast these days. We have a bunch of fixture congestion, and we'll be covering these midweek slates for you. So tomorrow we have a two-game slate. So I got the cheat sheet right up here. And it's between, I don't know, it's a little bit gross, actually, when you think about it. So we have Brighton hosting Nottingham Forest. So Nottingham Forest have been particularly bad so far this season. They've been conceding a ton of goals. I think they've been conceding over 2 goals per match, despite a ton of investment with all of their players. So I don't know. It makes sense, I guess, if you don't think about it too much, that Brighton is going to be a big favorite in this home spot. But Brighton really haven't been that great either since their manager left, Graham Potter. They've lost their last 2 games. So they have a loss to Tottenham, and they just lost on a road trip over to Brighton. So I don't know. The odds are what the odds are. They're very likely to keep a clean sheet. They have a 2 implied goal total. So we're going to want to target that sort of spot in cash games. And they're going to be very popular targets in tournaments as well. But I don't know. There's a lot of fragility going on. We're going to get into this a little bit more. But a lot of the best plays on this slate, there's a lot of minutes worries. So guys getting subbed off early with a lot of fixture congestion. So we're going to want to be very careful in our cash games. And hopefully we'll find some spots where we can take advantage of that fragility and make some stands in tournaments. But we'll get into that more as we go on. Our other matchup, it's going to be a little less enticing because there's going to be fewer goals. It's going to be Crystal Palace hosting Wolves. So Palace are going to be rightfully favored here at home, and this reasonably likely to keep a clean sheet. I mean, this Wolves offense, I think they only have 4 goals on the season. So Wolves have really been struggling to get anything going of late. But I don't know, Palace haven't been super convincing either. We haven't seen too much of them. But that's also going to be a very interesting spot for us to target. So one thing that I wanted to kind of go over before we get into everything, just get a broad view of the slate and what things are looking like. So first up, you're going to notice that there's no real clear goal scorer on this slate. So, there's not going to be someone like Lewandowski or even someone like a Harry Kane. So the most likely goal scorer per the odds is a Danny Welbeck at plus 155. And it really wasn't adding up that Brighton could have a total of 2, but not have many high implied goal scorers. But I just filtered out by Brighton over here. And you'll notice that McAllister, who takes penalties and takes a lot of shots, I think McAllister takes penalties. We can double check that. He's plus 220. Trossard has a hat trick recently, so he's plus 220. And then Gross and Lallana, kind of like 20% odds right there. Caicedo takes shots. So this is not a very concentrated offense. So I think there's not going to be a clear spot to go. So maybe that's going to be an advantage in GPPs, but it's going to be very, very frustrating. Brighton are likely to score a lot of goals, but we don't really have a good deal of certainty who those are going to be from. I mean, otherwise, it's the usual suspects, whoever starts for Crystal Palace. We have Wilfried Zaha at plus 210, but yeah, maybe not going to be many goals, so it's going to be important to capture those goals in tournaments. We're going to want our cash lineups to be able to get those goals just in case the floors aren't enough. So scrolling through here, just kind of checking out the set piece situation before we get into things. So on paper, we want to play Pascal Gross. He's priced very high because Brighton are massive favorites at 9,800. And when he's on the pitch, he's going to be taking most of the Brighton set pieces. But under Walter De Zerbi, the new manager, the issue going on here is that Gross is being subbed off quite early in a few of his matchups. And we can kind of see that right here. So he's been subbed off at the 65th minute. He's been subbed off at the 82nd minute. He's been subbed off at the 68th minute most recently on the weekend. And Brighton do have a visit to Manchester City. So I don't know what the manager is exactly going to do with that situation, but we shouldn't expect Pascal Gross. I mean, it might be optimistic to project him for 75 minutes. We're going to have to decide if that's going to be something we want to pay up for. There's not a lot to pay up for this slate, though. So I think that's just going to be a direction that we'll go in and maybe just block that spot off and try to fix everything else in our cash game lineups. The Palace situation is pretty nice. So we're projecting Olise to start. So if he starts, he and Eze, if they're both on the pitch, they're going to split set pieces. Otherwise, I think we can just expect one of them to take it. So that's going to be important. I think, the quality of that play, Eze or Olise, if it's just one of them, maybe they're a little bit more likely to be subbed off for each other. But that role for that 75 or 65 minutes is going to be so much better. We have Gibbs White. I mean, Nottingham Forest are a big underdog, but he's going to be taking set pieces there. Neco Williams no longer does, and he's kind of priced hilariously high. The defender position is a bit of a disaster, and we'll get into that as well. And then lastly, Wolves. So it looks like João Moutinho now has the set piece role based on everything right here. So we'll pay attention to starting lineups, and Guedes, he can indeed take some, but João Moutinho is going to be a really cheap source of set pieces in this match. So I don't know, I was kind of just looking and trying to make some cash lineups here, and if you kind of just jam in the obvious set piece takers, you kind of get a pretty decent lineup. So, I mean, you can definitely fit all these guys in. You can fit in Gross, and then you can fit in Eze. And then if you want, you can fit in Gibbs White, although I'm not sure you should prioritize them. You can play Traore. So we'll get through that when we talk about the forwards. And then, we'll talk about the rest of the positions there later. But yeah, let's get into this. So I just filtered through the cheat sheet right here. So this is a RotoWire. The RotoWire cheat sheet has really everything that you need to win when you're playing in these contests. So I use it. It has every possible piece of information you want. So you can get a free trial, no credit card required. Highly recommend. And then you can also join the Discord and chop it up with us as we tilt or try to sweat anything if anyone is close to being in first place. So if we're going to be looking at the forward position, so I mentioned a lot of our set piece takers are forward eligible. So if we look at the players who are only forward eligible, there's really nothing to see here in cash games. I mean, Danny Welbeck is vaguely interesting. I mean, Cermak somehow always plays these strikers that are, likely to score goals in cash games. So what do I know? But I don't think we have to make Welbeck a priority. I think we want those set pieces. Plus 155 simply is not enough. He's going to be a person that will target in tournaments. Then you have Taiwo Awoniyi, and I don't know, he's a very talented player, but I mean, I wrote it down. I think he's struggling to make it past the 70th minute. So he's not someone that we want to play really at all. I mean, a very contrarian option in tournaments, I guess. And then down here, Brennan Johnson, Hwang Hee-chan, and Mateta, these are all going to be tournament options. So if we're going to be getting into cash games, things get very interesting. We see a lot of green in the floor right here. And we already talked about it. We want to be considering Pascal Gross. He's going to be a key decision point right here. I mean, I think that we want to attack that sort of fragility in tournaments. So I bet that he is going to be played in cash games, and that's enough just to make me, want to play him. The pricing isn't so bad, and there's just not a lot to necessarily pay for that. I think we should just pay for our, 70 minutes of Pascal Gross and hope he gets up to 12 points. Maybe he contributes one of those goals. Like, we want enough Brighton players if that's a high scoring goal environment so that we can take advantage of that. So I think Gross, he's going to be one of your first players in your cash game lineup. I've already mentioned Eze, especially if he has a set piece monopoly, you can just lock him into your forward slot, and that's excellent. So Eze is going to be someone that we want to play as well. Not as likely to score a goal, though. The other person who really sticks out, who's forward eligible, and his price really still hasn't quite got up to how high I think it will go, is Adama Traore. So I think last week he was like 3,900, just dirt cheap. So everyone played him in cash games, and he was still too cheap in the most recent slate. I think he was only like 5,500. I think he's a little bit too cheap now. He makes a ton of sense to roster in your cash game lineups. I mean, he's been averaging 8.5 crosses per 90 minutes. He's got a great floor, likely to draw fouls. In this matchup against Crystal Palace, it's not like it's prohibitively bad or anything like this. So with that sort of salary savings, if you're going to be spending in that mid-range, I think it makes a lot of sense to go up to Adama in that situation. I think we need to update Morgan Gibbs White. He's also at 7,300. So taking most of the set pieces for Nottingham Forest, I guess you can play one of Gibbs White or one of Traore. When you're making a cash game lineup, actually, you're probably only going to want to play one player from one of these underdog teams. Maybe you can play two Wolves players. It depends how you all get it set up. But, maybe you just play Traore or you play Morgan Gibbs White, and then you just try to get all the goals and set pieces in this Brighton match and in this Crystal Palace match. So that's definitely going to be one way to attack it. Now, personally, I'm pretty intrigued by either Zaha or Trossard. So if we scroll up and look at the odds, they are both, I guess Zaha's odds moved up recently in the recent update. When I looked at, they were both plus 220, but they're kind of like very similar players, right? They're going to be at the wings. So sometimes Trossard, some people project him to start at wing back. So you want to pay attention to that. Zaha becomes a much better play at that point. But if we think that Trossard is definitely going to be a forward, I think either of those options, you can actually make that make sense in your cash games. So, I mean, what would that sort of thing look like you put in Zaha, we're going to want to pay down a defender. And maybe instead of just having a mid-price utility, we go down to the lower. There's a bunch of midfielders under 5,000 that we can definitely play if we want. So I think just because we want to be live for some of those goals in this match, I think Trossard and Zaha, I mean, Trossard's been pretty popular in cash games recently as well. I think I'm going to expect them to be played in those double ups. So just something to keep in mind. They both have decent floors, and if they score a goal, you're probably just definitely going to want to have them. So just the way that all the opportunity cost is, you could just decide to play, I want to play Adama and I want to play Morgan Gibbs-White. I think it might make a little bit more sense just to say, look, I'm going to upgrade to Zaha or Trossard, depending on who you like more. I like Zaha a bit more. And then just say, I will just downgrade at midfield. And it's not so bad. You can play a Moutinho or you can play a Caicedo or something like that. So that's what I think the forward position looks like for cash games. Just jam in those set pieces. And I do think it is worth trying to get onto Zaha. There's probably going to be surprises when lineups come out, so we don't want to get married to any of these choices. But that's kind of my impression just looking at it. All right, so let's move on to our more midfield eligible only players. So I've already talked about Gibbs-White and Michael Olise. I think they're both reasonable cash game options. Olise is someone I'd really like to play, actually, but he's almost always subbing on to games, which is really frustrating. But he usually does go, over 85 minutes when he does start, especially, you can take a look at the bench and see if there's anyone who's a threat to come on for Olise. I think he's a totally reasonable play. And there have been spots where I've needed the $500 extra of salary to get to the players that I want. So I think Olise or Eze, they're very similar in this situation. The rest of these high-end midfielders, I'm just not particularly interested in whatsoever. So you have McAllister at 7,500, and that's steep. I mean, he definitely likes to take shots and make some forward runs. I remember last year people were playing him a lot in tournaments and cash, and he does take penalties, but at 7,500, that's 500 less than Olise, and I just feel like the floor isn't necessarily as reliable in that spot. I think that's maybe a place that we'll look for more in tournaments and in our GPPs. I mean, Solly March at 7,200, that's a really tough price to pay. I would rather, get in those Crystal Palace set pieces and get in gross and then look elsewhere. So, yeah, the high-end guys, I'm really only thinking about in midfield only, probably mostly Olise and Gibbs-White. I don't know. I think I'd rather play Traore than Gibbs-White and use that extra salary elsewhere. There is some going down to the more mid-range and lower price options. So we have a big price gap right here. So Ruben Neves at 5,900. I mean, he keeps on scoring goals, so good for him. But I'm not sure I necessarily want to prioritize paying $6,000 for Ruben Neves in this spot. Feels kind of just like you're chasing steam in that sort of situation. He's been really Wolves' main goal scorer. He's tied with the lead for 2 goals for them this season. I don't know. I just can't stomach that price. I'm sure he's going to sink me in GPPs when he scores a late free kick goal or something like that. But I'm much more interested in these guys in this range below $5,000. So one guy who's been very great recently is Moises Caicedo. So if I just pull up his stats right here. Yeah, he's been really good in the last few games. He's been going a full 90, which is something that, that's going to be something that we're going to want if, especially the expensive guys are not going a full 90. And, against Brentford, he had 14 floor points. He didn't score a goal or assist just based on shots. So he's moving forward, some shots and chances created. And he also, can accrue quite a few defensive stats. He had scored 10 points against Tottenham recently, and he even had a 17 spot, but it looks like he scored a goal against Leicester. So Caicedo is a pretty interesting option at 4,900. It's kind of like a lower price point to get access into that Brighton game. And you might be able to afford him in cash games. I have a build where I chose to get up to him. Certainly not necessary. I just think that he's a bit more likely maybe than the field will expect to play a part in a goal. And so, maybe there's only 3 goals on this slate. So if Caicedo is involved in a goal or an assist, you're going to need him. So sprinkling these kind of plays into your tournament lineups, especially if you play a lot of lineups, I think that's definitely going to be one of the ways to go. I mean, certainly like playing Caicedo in tournaments more than João Moutinho. So, I mean, cue the brace that he's going to score on me later. He always seems to do that whenever we speak poorly of him on the podcast. But, I mean, Wolves are not favorites. It's not a horrible spot, but, I mean, paying for, 8 corners or something like that. I guess it's fine in cash games. You can do that. But that's a spot where I kind of want more upside. And I'm really not going to be targeting the Wolves offense. Especially pieces that just aren't likely to score goals like Moutinho. In tournaments, I'd be much more interested in Matías Núñez, actually. So Núñez, he's been lining up for a couple games in a central attacking midfield role. So he's definitely depending on the midfield three. So sometimes you'll see these Wolves lineups as like a 4-3-3 or a 4-2-3-1. Now, if Núñez is playing with Moutinho and he's playing with Neves, Núñez is going to be a little bit more forward. So I'd expect him to be a little bit more live, taking shots and things like that. So Núñez is a great person to target inside of tournaments. In cash games, I mean, I played Nudes in cash games before. It's a bit frustrating. I would just take Moutinho's floor. But, I mean, it's just an easy pivot. If you have a cash game lineup and you want to turn into a GPP lineup, just plug out Moutinho, find the extra 100 for Núñez if you even need to do that in the first place. So those three guys, those are going to be very interesting spots for me personally. Now I'm scrolling all the way down. Now there's been some sources, so we're projecting this as well, that Adam Lallana will start. Now if Adam Lallana starts, he's going to be 3,100 and he's going to be starting as an attacking midfielder. So I'm not sure you actually need the salary in that case. And my main problem with Adam Lallana is that there's just the opportunity cost of the spot he takes up. So, maybe he scores 5 points for you. It costs only 3,100. But where else am I going to be using that salary necessarily? That's going to be one thing that you want to check. You're certainly not going to be paying up at defender. And if he subbed off at 60 minutes, I mean, I'd just rather find the money for Moutinho. But, I mean, he is kind of a brand name. So if he starts, I expect him certainly to be a popular option in this spot. But yeah, that's kind of the vibe for midfield. We're probably going to be rostering forward eligible players, midfield forward eligible players in the midfield spot. So you might end up, rostering Traore in a midfield spot or Eze in a midfield spot. Otherwise, you might have Elise in there and then pay for one of these lower price guys, whoever you would like. Moutinho a lot in cash. Maybe look elsewhere for a little bit more upside in those tournament lineups. All right. So now we are all going to have to do our best to not throw up when we look at defender in this slate. And it is brutal. So if you just look at the cheat sheet, you say, oh, look, Neco Williams, he plays wing back. Sometimes he takes corners. He shows up on the free kick list. And look, he's got a floor of 11 points average per 90 this season. But those are his total season stats. So if you actually pull up Neco Williams, he has not been particularly good these last 2 games. Ever since Gibbs White came into the side and took the set pieces, that's really crushed Neco Williams' floor. He's just not getting there on open play value. He had 7 points recently against Wolves. He subbed on against Aston Villa. He was a tactical sub off at Leicester, so that was very difficult as well. Recently, Nottingham Forest have been experimenting with using a back 4 versus a back 5. And if Nottingham Forest are in a back 4, Neco Williams is just unplayable at that price. I don't even want to, do some gigabrain tournament strategy. I'm always puzzled by this Nottingham Forest team. I always want to play these talented guys, but in a back 4, I just don't think he's very likely to pay off that price tag of 6,300. And you're going to be making sacrifices in these other spots. So we've already talked, there's a lot of interesting GPP forwards, just goal dependent guys. And there's a lot of interesting midfield forward eligible players who have a nice floor ceiling combo. And you're giving that up to pay Neco Williams. That does not sound particularly worthwhile to me. And defender is just kind of gross no matter as you keep on going down. I mean, Renan Lodi, he's not someone we want to play in this spot. Ike Nori, I mean, I don't know when the last time he took a set piece was, so I really have no idea why his price is still 5,600, especially for a spot where Wolves are underdogs. Estupiñán is interesting at 4,800, but he cannot make it past the 70th or 75th minute for some reason. So I don't really think that you should prioritize getting Estupiñán if you can afford him. I think he's definitely better than the center backs that we'll be considering, as you can see, as we keep on throwing all these guys in the garbage bin. So maybe in 70 minutes and Brighton are crushing on it and Forest is stooping on can get there as a wing back. But he's not even a lock to start. I don't know. That's just not a spot I want to go. I think I'd rather use the extra salary in that case. What else? So you go down Johnny. I mean, you don't want to play Johnny or Semedo at these prices. They play fullback, sure, and that's always interesting. But they are underdogs at Palace, so that's not a priority. Veltman, I do not know why he's 4,200. He hasn't even scored a goal recently, so he must have taken a set piece. Harry Toffolo, 4,100. Now we're starting to get into prices that we can stomach. He's not particularly good either. He's been very poor, and he's likely to be a risk to be sub for Lodi if he starts. So finally, we get into the center back range. So, first name that interests me is Joachim Andersen. So Joachim Andersen is 6'3". Yes, we've reached the part of the program where we talk about how tall these players are. Hopefully they can accidentally score a goal. But Andersen has actually been pretty good for Crystal Palace and pretty lively for a center back. So I wrote this down. I was talking to Adam Zadroik before this slate, and Adam found some next-gen stats right here that Joachim Andersen averages 14 passes into the final third per 90. So at 4K, when there's really nothing to pay for at defender, he'll hopefully be going for headers from Eze, who you're already going to be playing in cash games. So there's a little bit of correlation that makes sense there. I think Andersen definitely one of the more playable guys. In a similar spirit, you can play Mark Gahey for Crystal Palace. They have 35% clean sheet odds or so. That definitely makes a lot of sense as well. These fullbacks are just really not worth playing for me. Like Tyrick Mitchell, he does not get forward, neither does Joel Ward. I mean, I'd rather play a center back who has a shot to get a goal. So, when you're picking your defender spot, you just gotta pick a couple names and hopefully they don't get a yellow card or something. Hopefully they score enough points so their team ends up getting a clean sheet in cash games, just so, hopefully your forwards take care of you in the rest of your lineup. You're certainly not conceding a lot of points. There's not a lot of opportunity costs in this spot. So it definitely makes sense just to pay down and use the salary elsewhere. So I like Mark Gahey. He makes a lot of sense. Adam Webster seems a little bit too cheap. He is also 6'3". At least that's what Google says. And at 3,100, why not? Looks like he almost averages a shot per game. So especially if you're rostering Pascal Gross, if there's a goal scored off a set piece, there's a decent chance that Adam Webster might be involved. So I think it makes a ton of sense just to click him, click Gahey, click Andersen, whoever two defenders you want, and just forget about it and hope you get the decision right, especially if there's some volatile goal situation going on. So really brutal situation overall in defender, but if we just know to pay down and then pay up in other spots, I think that's going to help us with our cash game. There's just not a lot of opportunity cost. Finally, we should discuss goalkeeper here. So this is a 2-game slate. So in general, I'm more likely to want to pay up for a highly favored goalkeeper in a 2-game slate. And even though Brighton have not been particularly excellent lately, the cheat sheet still has them at 46% clean sheet odds. They are 70% chance to win. Nottingham Forest are disjointed. I think it just makes sense. I mean, it's probably one of the best plays on the slate, to be completely honest. Sanchez might be one of the first names that you want to click into your lineup. I think that 11% clean sheet difference and that almost like 25% win odds, I think that's definitely worth the extra $500. Definitely worth that, especially on this slate. So if you have enough for Guaita, I mean, just try to find that extra. It is $600 to get all the way up to Sanchez, in my opinion. So you could play Guaita. I mean, Dean Henderson, he's kind of like a hero sometimes. It depends. Penalty saves, and he can rack up a lot of saves. The price is certainly right at 3,800, but that is not something that we need to do in cash games, I think. So I would rather just pay up for Sanchez and hope I get my 12 points and that the rest of my lineup does enough. And then, Sa has been fine this season. But this is probably way too much goalkeeper discussion, to be completely honest. I think if you pay up, just find that money to go up to Sanchez. There's really no reason to play Guaita over Sanchez other than, obscure game theory reasons in your tournaments. And then, sure, if you want to pay down, just make sure it correlates with your lineup. So maybe you want to play João Moutinho. You want to defy my recommendations. Well, maybe then Wolves might keep a clean sheet, so you can fade some of the Crystal Palace guys. You put in Matinho, and then you put in one of the Wolves center backs. So whoever's been starting for them lately. I have you can start Toti Gomez, or you can put in Kilman right there. So that's something that makes complete sense. And then you can just correlate from there. So I think that kind of takes care of things for cash games. I think if you do the obvious move, and so you prioritize getting in the Brighton set pieces, and you prioritize getting in the Crystal Palace set pieces, maybe even get in Zaha or Trossard, because you want to be live for a goal, even though neither of those two take set pieces themselves. I think you can fit that into your lineup quite well. I think there's a reasonable option between 4,000 and 5,000 with Caicedo or Matinho or Nunes in the midfield spots. So you can save some salary there. You're just going to pick 2 defenders and you'll play Sanchez. Sounds like a completely reasonable cash game lineup. Maybe make some 2v2s. Like, do I want to play Adama in a forward spot, or do I want to play Morgan Gibbs-White in a forward spot? I think I prefer Adama just for his open play value. Wolves are a better team. But those are what the decisions are going to be looking like in these situations. So let's move over to tournaments. So I think, one of the things in the description of the video is, our cash game lineup is going to look a lot like tournament lineups. And I think that's going to be the case mostly with respect to how we spend our salary on this slate. So again, let's just assume, for example, we don't want to play Neco Williams, even if he is in a back 5. Then, people are probably going to be playing favored center backs. And so because there's not a lot of opportunity cost, maybe one thing we can say is maybe Brighton keeps a clean sheet, or, maybe Wolves fail to score yet again, and Crystal Palace keeps a clean sheet. In this case, I think it's a perfectly good GPP strategy just to pair your center backs with a set piece taker and then throw in the goalie. So maybe a decent spine to a GPP lineup is something like, well, I'll put in Eze or Elise or both, and then, put in Anderson, put in Gehi, and then put in Guaita. That's something that makes a lot of sense. Then the other side of that lineup, maybe Nottingham Forest scores, so maybe you put in Brennan Johnson, or maybe it's an own goal. I doubt Nottingham Forest scores. But this is certainly one very viable way to attack tournaments. And I think it's going to be very popular. There just isn't a lot of opportunity cost at defense. So maybe that'll be something to look into, actually, how much the field is doing a full goalkeeper center back stack. I'm not sure if it's going to be over-owned or under-owned, to be honest. I feel like people are pretty quickly going to see that defender's a cesspool. So I expect that to be very popular. I think it makes sense in cash games to pair your center back with their set piece taker. And in tournaments, I think it's almost essential. So if you're going to be playing Eze and you need to spend down a defender, it better be Gehi or it better be Anderson. I mean, you sort of want that correlation. So worst case scenario, Anderson doesn't really do anything. He scores 4 points and Palace, concede a goal. But I mean, the highest scoring defender might have like 6 points in this slate, maybe 7. So that's hardly going to sink you. So the worst case scenario is not so bad. And the best case scenario is that, Eze's cross lands on Anderson's head and you have a goal and you get like 19 points for your lineup after all the assists and chances created and shots on goal and goal points come through. So I think it's going to be an absolute must. So I am extremely unlikely to build a tournament lineup. I don't want to guarantee anything that doesn't pair a center back with the set piece taker. It just makes too much sense. You kind of need those outs. Margins are very tight on these 2-game slates. So you're going to want to be open to goal and assist combinations from center backs in this sort of situation. And then just another tournament point that we might want to make. So I was kind of complaining about some of these minutes that these guys are going to have. Like Pascal Gross, he might get subbed off at, the 60-minute mark or the 65th minute mark. And maybe he scores a goal and that's enough, but maybe he's only on 8 points. And if Gross gets subbed off early and only scores 8 points, he's reasonably active, creates a couple chances, takes a couple set pieces. Well, you're not going to want to have that anchor on your lineup. I think it's going to be more likely that you're going to want other combinations of those players. So I think it makes a lot of sense to fade Pascal Gross in certain tournament lineups. I mean, I'm not suggesting a full fade. He's just an extremely fragile spot, and it's very easy to see what goes wrong in that situation. And the cheat sheet actually gives us some hints about who stands to benefit in such a situation. So if Gross is subbed off early, well, Solly March is going to end up taking some set pieces. Maybe McAllister. He took a couple last year, but I think March is the most likely option. So I think we're going to want to look in that direction. So by not paying on Gross, you save $2,000 to go down to someone like March or McAllister. There's plenty of forward eligible players to play, so you retinker down there. And then you can just kind of get a nice Brighton stack in there and hope that you get all of the goals. So, I mean, let's try to construct something like that right here. Yeah, I mean, you can just take Welbeck. So you can sub Gross down for Welbeck. So that's going to save you $2,400. Welbeck's the most likely goal scorer, so it'll be popular, but totally reasonable option. And then with the extra salary, now we have enough money to pay for Solly March, or you have enough money to pay for Alex McAllister. You can even put Caicedo in there, and you can kind of make it into a full Brighton stack. So let's try to build this right here. So I can put in Welbeck, I have March, I have McAllister. This does not look bad whatsoever. So I guess the thesis for doing this type of Brighton lineup here, you can put in a Webster. You can even play a Stupinian if you want in this sort of situation. Hope he gets enough minutes for the goal right there. Yeah, I mean, once you fake Gross, you can basically play whoever you want on Brighton. And if that game has 4 goals, hopefully you have as many lottery tickets as possible to be part of those goal and assist combinations. So that type of lineup construction, I think, is definitely going to be probably pretty popular. It does require fading Gross, so I don't think it'll be too popular, but I think it makes a lot of sense. It's speculating that the Crystal Palace game is going to be, and Wolves game is going to be extremely low scoring, or perhaps there's a substitute there, which I'm not too scared of. I think if we scroll up, we'll see that, the total there is 2.4. So, 0-1 with an own goal or a sub goal or someone extremely low owned who you don't need. I think that's pretty reasonable. So yeah, Brighton stacks look good in tournaments, especially when you're willing to get off of Pascal Gross. Similarly, the price on the Crystal Palace guys, that's like a lower total. So that's going to be tougher to make things work. So I think I'd be less likely to stack these Crystal Palace guys in that situation. I mean, Wolves have been terrible. There's no reason I want to spend, 6 lineup spots on these Wolves players. So that's one productive direction you can go. If you look through here, we can go back to the forwards we originally looked at. Again, I don't want to really play him in tournaments that much particularly. Yeah, I mean, Mateta makes sense in tournaments. Brendan Johnson is too cheap. I mean, hopefully he'll eventually score a goal. But again, these Nottingham Forest guys, the route to playing them it's just super, super thin, I think. So that covers that part of the tournaments. But yeah, I think what's just going to be common is you just kind of take your cash game lineup. You have a ton of set piece takers, and you just plug a couple of them out. So maybe you say, I think Eze gets subbed off a little bit early. I think Gross gets subbed off a little bit early. So I'm going to put in Zaha if you're not already playing them, and Mateta, or I'm going to put in Welbeck and Trossard, something like this. That's going to be a very common strategy. Is it going to be worth paying up for Neco Williams once at defender? Oh, I can't help it. I'm getting into these. I'm getting stuck in my old ways. I'm too fascinated with Forest here, but I suppose you could. That would be very contrarian. So I don't think people are going to be really willing to play Neco Williams. So you'll be on a different construction at the very least. So I don't know. Maybe you pair Williams. I think it's probably a bit too thin to expect Forest to keep a clean sheet. You could go down that route, or maybe you could just pair Neco Williams with one of his strikers and just hope for a miracle. At that point, you're going to be different enough that I think you can just play Brighton players and hope that game goes off. Just play the best plays at that point. So I think there is a small case to be made for Neco Williams, but really only if that's in a back 5. I mean, I think that about covers everything. I mean, it's a 2-game slate. There's a lot of fragility. There's not too much to talk about. I mean, in the tournaments, hopefully you get every single goal. You want to make sure that you build your lineups so that you are going to be more live for goals. That means getting off the Matinos. That means making your combinations with your center backs and set piece takers as well. What other takeaways do we have, really? I think that's about it. Yeah, I mean, play Pascal Gross in cash games, maybe fade him in tournaments. That's going to be your route. Otherwise, get those set piece takers in for your cash games. Get ready to 2v2 off of them inside of your tournaments. Hopefully you get all the goals and hopefully you win all the money. So I think we're going to call it there. So that's enough for the 2-game slate. I think there is going to be later in the week, either Thursday or Wednesday. So I think Wednesday, there's a 4-game slate. So I think Adam and Ryan are going to be broadcasting that. Otherwise, if you're not a member already, sign up for the soccer trial. Join us in Discord. We have a lot of fun chopping it up, even in the interleague slates. But yeah, we'll just call it at that. Good luck. Hope you score goals, and we'll see you later.